The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the field of Clontarf. The morning dew glistened on the grass. It was not long before it would be trampled underfoot by the many warriors preparing for battle. It was April 23rd, 1014, a day that would be remembered for the epic clash between the Viking warriors and the Irish kings. The Viking camp was a hive of activity. Men donned their armor, tightened the straps of their helmets, and inspected their weapons. The clinking of chainmail and the sharpening of blades filled the air. Among these fierce Norsemen stood a warrior of great renown, Sigurd Thorkelson. His reputation as a fearless and formidable fighter had earned him the respect of his comrades and the fear of his enemies. Sigurd's eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the sight of the Irish forces assembling on the other side of the field. Led by High King Brian Boru, the Irish army was a coalition of various clans and factions, united by a common enemy. Sigurd knew that Brian Boru was a formidable leader, and this battle would be no easy victory. "Today, we fight for glory," Sigurd bellowed to his men, raising his sword high. "We fight for honor. We fight for the legacy of our people. Let the Irish know the fury of the Northmen." His words were met with a roar of approval from the Viking warriors. They pounded their shields with their swords, creating a thunderous clamor that echoed across the field. The sound was both a rallying cry and a challenge to their opponents. As the two armies moved closer, the tension in the air was palpable. The Irish forces, consisting of heavily armored warriors and light-footed skirmishers, formed a formidable line. Brian Boru, standing at the center, radiated an aura of determination and strength. Beside him were his sons, Murchad and Tatch, both skilled warriors in their own right. The battle began with the clash of spears and the roar of warriors. Sigurd led his men into the fray, his sword a blur of motion as he cut down any Irishman who dared stand in his way. The Vikings fought with savage ferocity, their battle cries mingling with the screams of the wounded and dying. Despite their initial momentum, the Vikings found themselves facing fierce resistance. The Irish fought with a tenacity born of desperation, knowing that their very land and way of life were at stake. Sigurd found himself locked in combat with an Irish warrior, their swords ringing out as they clashed again and again. The Irishman was skilled, but Sigurd's experience and brute strength eventually won out. With a final powerful swing, he felled his opponent and moved on to the next. As the battle raged on, it became clear that both sides were suffering heavy casualties. The ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen, and the air was thick with the stench of blood and sweat. Sigurd fought tirelessly, driven by a fierce determination to see his people victorious. In the midst of the chaos, Sigurd caught sight of Brian Boru himself. The High King was surrounded by his bodyguards, but Sigurd knew that killing him would be a decisive blow to the Irish forces. With a roar, he charged towards Brian, cutting down any who stood in his way. Brian Boru met Sigurd's charge with calm resolve. The two leaders clashed, their swords ringing out as they exchanged blows. Sigurd could see the determination in Brian's eyes, and he knew that this would be a fight to the death. The two warriors fought with everything they had, each seeking to end the other's life. The battle seemed to go on forever, but in the end it was Sigurd who prevailed. With a mighty swing of his sword, he struck Brian Boru down. The High King fell to the ground, mortally wounded. Sigurd stood over him, his chest heaving with exertion. But even as Brian lay dying, the Irish king managed to speak. "You may have killed me, Norseman," he said, his voice weak but defiant. "But the spirit of Ireland will never be broken." With those final words, Brian Boru died, and a great cheer went up from the Viking warriors. They had won the battle, but the cost had been high. Sigurd looked around at the carnage, the bodies of friend and foe alike strewn across the field. Victory had come at a terrible price. As the sun set on the battlefield of Clontarf, Sigurd knew that this day would be remembered for generations to come. The Vikings had triumphed, but the legacy of Brian Boru and his brave warriors would live on. The battle had shown the world the indomitable spirit of both the Norsemen and the Irish, and the memory of their epic clash would echo through the ages.